told my husband's friends he was feminine. They teased him relentlessly. Hello, Reddit. My name is Coral, and I'm 28 years old. I've been married for a year now, but my marriage is about to break apart. I know. It's probably too early for any marriage to be ending in ruins already, but mine is, and it's all my fault. I ruined my marriage with my own hands, and now I don't know how to fix it. That's why I'm here, to ask for advice or some sort of help that will perhaps help me win Kelvin's heart again. I told my husband's friends he was feminine. They teased him relentlessly, and he had just left the house without a word to any of us. He didn't even show up until 2 days after. 2 days of panicking, calling, texting without any sort of response to both, and even calling other people to know whether they've seen him. He had shown up and told me that our marriage was over, and he would give me a divorce letter as soon as he could. I was shocked, and I tried begging, thinking it had only been because of what I said about him to his friends, but he had just dropped his phone in my lap. The phone had some very incriminating evidence of my dirty secret that I thought Kelvin would never find out. Way before I met Kelvin, I had always had this idea that I never wanted my man to work. Not that he wouldn't at all. I just wanted him to be a stay-at-home husband and dad to our kids. If he did have a job, it would be work that allowed for bendable hours, and that you could do any time and anywhere you pleased. I got this idea from my Aunt Imelda. You see, my Aunt Imelda is my mom's older sister. You know that fun aunt that every kid wants to spend time with because you get a lot of goodies and you never have to be limited because of a bad tooth? She was that type of aunt, so I hung around her a lot, and she sure loved having me around. So does her stay-at-home husband, my Uncle Matt. Uncle Matt never really does anything aside from house chores, and he sure did it well. He was a great cook, and he was always making sure to clean up everywhere and cook before Aunt Imelda returned from work. Although Aunt Imelda is quite older than Uncle Matt by 10 years. They loved each other and seemed to get along well. My mom, however, didn't exactly like their lifestyle. She hated the idea of a man doing a woman's work, and she definitely never hid her feelings about it whenever Aunt Imelda came around. My dad works while my mom stays at home, does the chores, and takes care of her kids. We're 3, 2 girls and 1 boy. She was very traditional, and it was very obvious in the way she brought us up. My siblings saw nothing wrong with my mom's view on things, and so it was easy for them to follow her rules and ways of doing things. Although they liked Aunt Imelda, probably not as much as I did, they didn't frown at her marriage arrangement like my mom did. I was the rebellious child right from age 8, despite being the youngest. I didn't like all the rules, and I certainly didn't like the one thing my mom was always nagging about, a traditional family. I wanted one like that of Aunt Imelda. It seemed like fun being the one in control and being the provider. Doing something different felt exciting. I guess I started living my life to become like Aunt Imelda, or maybe worse. My parents and my siblings complained about how demanding and controlling I was, despite being the youngest, and I also expected everyone to respect my wish. But I never thought much of it. Even my friends complained about how controlling I get most of the time, and I lost a lot of friends because of it. But at that point, I thought they all just couldn't stand the woman I was becoming. I wanted to become just like Aunt Imelda, and she didn't care what people thought. I mean, if she did, she wouldn't have a guy that's way younger than her, and still be in the marriage, despite people's words. She was an accountant, so I decided to become an accountant. I chose the school she studied in and everything else. Aunt Imelda was so proud of me, and she had gotten me my very first car. In university, I did my very best to become the best. I wanted to just be the best. Like I would always say to myself, the best is the only height to be achieved. Nothing else is allowed. I only say that to myself and not other people because when I said it once to a friend, she had looked at me irritated that I was thinking like that, and she had stopped being my friend. But then again, I felt like it was the truth. I am a perfectionist, and when things don't go my way, I freak out. And when I say freak out, I mean I take it out on other people. I only dated one guy in the university, and that had been Raymond. Raymond was a perfectionist like me, and he also was obsessed with being the best. I thought dating someone who was just like me was going to be superb, but it had been the exact opposite. We fought all the time, and that was because we both wanted to be the dominating one in the relationship. Raymond wanted to dictate whatever went on in the relationship, and him wanting to do that made me want to resist and rebel instead. Our relationship was one big disaster, and within a month of being together, we broke up, and we didn't even speak to each other again. I didn't allow Raymond to sleep with me throughout the course of the relationship. He wanted to, and honestly I wanted to too, but I just didn't want him wanting to dominate again during sex. I mean, he always tried whenever we made out, and it annoyed me greatly. Like one time when we were making out, he held my head to place me in the perfect position so he could dominate and be the one leading the kiss. I stopped him immediately, and I had ordered him out of my apartment, and he never apologized too, even when he was wrong. We both believed we were right, and we always tried to prove that to each other, and even to others. Like one embarrassing situation that happened in front of our friends that had made us break up. Raymond's friends were going out to a party held by another student, and he had invited me. No, he had actually tried to demand my presence there, and I had refused to go. But I eventually went, because my friends had also invited me to the party. When Raymond saw me, he was angry. I honored my friend's invitation over his. We sat together at one table, his friends and my friends. They all were discussing very loudly and laughing and getting along very easily. But Raymond and I just stayed silent, glaring at each other. Soon, one of his friends decided to go get all of us a drink and had asked what I would prefer. I don't drink because it has always seemed inappropriate, especially for a perfectionist like me. So I chose to have a Coke, but before I could say that, Raymond had told his friend to get me a bottle of Coke. It annoyed me very much. It was Coke I wanted truly, but I didn't like that he chose it for me. So I decided to tell his friend to get me another drink instead. But Raymond didn't bother to hide his anger and had just lashed out on me, not minding where we were. I couldn't just sit there and watch him insult me that badly, so I also replied with a few of my own. Our friends just kept looking at us because they couldn't interfere, knowing the kind of people we were. I eventually left the party first, but that was not before actually ending things with him. Our relationship ended right there at that party, and we never talked again, despite the fact that we saw each other often, but we just ignored each other and pretended like we didn't know each other. I swore to myself that I was never going to date someone like me ever again. When I graduated, I went to stay with my aunt for 2 months. She wanted to get me a job, but eventually it was taking so long, I decided to carve my way out. But those 2 months of staying at her place, I dated someone, and it was behind her back. I mean, it wasn't exactly dating per se. It had been more of sleeping around with. Despite the fact that I always told my aunt everything about me, I didn't tell her this one. Because how exactly would you tell your aunt you were sleeping around with her husband? Yes, I slept with Matt several times more than I could count. He was actually the first man I slept with. So yes, I was a virgin when I slept with Matt. It hadn't exactly been my fault. You know how I told you I've always admired Aunt Imelda's beautiful marriage because of how her husband stayed at home and she worked? Yeah, well, that's not the full story. I had more than what you'd call admiration for my Uncle Matt. I had a crush on him as a teenager because of how gullible he was and how he behaved around Aunt Imelda. He was like a puppy that needed a protective owner, and I wanted to be that. But Aunt Imelda was already his. I once told my older sister about my crush on Uncle Matt, and she had dismissed it as just admiration and that I was just being childish. And once I told my mom that I liked Uncle Matt. Well, let's just say it didn't end well. My mom had banned me from going to their place for months, and she had grounded me for a month, and in her words, for having those kinds of devil-filled thoughts in my head. I stopped telling anyone that I liked Uncle Matt way more than was necessary, because I realized that was going to be their reaction. But then, after high school and going to the university, until graduation, I thought I had truly just had a teenage infatuation with him because I stopped thinking about him entirely, but it was a different case living with them. Matt and I were almost always the only ones around in the house, and I did nothing around the house. I just would lie in bed all day and tap away on my phone until I got bored and then sleep again. Matt would always come to let me know when he was done cooking. He literally did everything in the house, and when I tried helping, he never allowed me. He would say how much he loved doing the chores. Because I was bored almost all the time, I started to hang out with him just to ease my boredom. I would stay with him in the kitchen while he cooked, and then we would talk about university experiences, I'll talk about mine, and he would talk about his, and we would compare the experiences together and decide which was more fun, back in the days or the present time. I enjoyed talking to him because he had quite a broad range of knowledge, and that's because, after the house chores, he had time on his hands, so he read. Matt and I got even closer, and I started to feel some silly ways about him again. Only this time, I knew it wasn't just a crush, but I liked him. And this time, I didn't make the mistake of telling anyone how I was feeling about my aunt's husband. I just kept it to myself, thinking I could manage it. But I eventually couldn't, and I had ended up seducing Matt into my bed. I noticed, don't ask me how, but I did, that Aunt Imelda was not sleeping with Matt enough. I mean, she was always too tired from work, and whenever she got home, she just crashed sometimes on the cushion in the sitting room. It was Matt who would carry her to their bedroom and remove her clothes and adjust her to sleep properly. And then, when it was as early as 6 a.m, she was out of the house again to beat traffic. They barely even talked most times during the day and almost never at night. It was only on Sundays that Aunt Imelda wasn't busy and had time for Matt. It always made me jealous watching them. They seemed perfect together. And there was the fact that she never treated him like a piece of furniture when she was around, always wanting to help him with the chores, even when he insisted she didn't. She didn't seem to be as controlling of her relationship with Matt as I had viewed her to be when I was younger. But their cute relationship only made me want Matt the most, and I was even starting to have dreams about him. It was that desperate. One day, Matt had walked in on me masturbating with his picture that I took one time when he wasn't aware, and I had the photo framed just so I could stare at it. I didn't realize that I had not locked the door, and I was still in the act when he walked in. He was obviously shocked, and he just simply left the room. Aunt Imelda had gone to work as usual, so it was just us at home. So I went in search of him and found him in his usual spot, the kitchen. I didn't apologize for using his picture to please myself sexually. I had even blamed him for being so seductive and enticing a little girl like me. Matt was so easy to manipulate, like I said, and by the time I finished my little speech, he was apologizing. I went towards him and begged him to sleep with me, and he had refused. But I forced him to cry, and while he was trying to pet me, I just did my thing. We had sex in the kitchen the first time, and then again inside my bedroom properly. Matt was really good in bed, and I envied my aunt even more. We had sex so often around the house that it became our routine. Whenever Aunt Imelda was around, I was so tortured because I wanted to have sex with Matt, but he couldn't because my aunt is around. I started becoming more daring and would text him pictures of myself naked while he sat beside my aunt, perhaps when they watched a movie or something, and I would watch him struggle in his seat. It pleased me greatly. Eventually, I got tired of sitting around the house and just having sex with Matt. I decided to move out and get myself a job, since one from my aunt wasn't forthcoming. I moved into the next neighborhood so I didn't have to be so far from Matt, and he could visit me any time to have sex. But all that stopped when I met Kelvin. Kelvin was my next-door neighbor, and he owned a workshop for metal artwork and only worked at his own convenience. He was so attractive, and I liked him almost immediately when I saw him. I spoke to him first, and he had been really shy, so I realized it was because he didn't like being around people much. He chose to have his workshop right by his house, and he worked alone too, no matter how big the project was. Another admirable feature about him was that he never disappointed his clients. Despite working around metals, hard equipment, and even fire, Kelvin managed to surprisingly have the softest hands I've ever known. His hands would deceive you, and you'd actually think he worked at a spa and not around all those metals. Kelvin was really cute, and I wanted to stop at nothing to be with him, including seducing him. I stopped Matt from coming over to my place and told Kelvin he was just my aunt's husband checking on me to see whether I had settled in my new environment, and Kelvin believed me. We started dating 2 months after meeting, and it was amazing. Kelvin was just so nice and gentle, and he always seemed to like when I got dominant, especially during sex. He never complained whenever I tried to make things go my way. I thought it was because he was gullible. But now I see that it was because he just loved me and wanted me to be happy, even if it meant giving way to things that were inconvenient for him. I got a job after 1 month of searching as an accountant, and Kelvin had been so proud of me that he even took me out to celebrate. I couldn't exactly get the job because I was the best among the people interviewed. I slept my way into getting the job. Yes, I slept with not just one but two of the interviewers, and I would have slept with a third person. But she was female, and although she had shown interest in sleeping with me, I just couldn't do it. I guess I couldn't go that low. Well, I got the job and got busy. Busy with trying to please my boss so I could get a promotion, and I did get promoted twice, in fact, within a short 6 months of working there. You guessed right. I was also sleeping with my boss, and he was giving me merits and special treatment for it. It became hard eventually because the only thing my boss wanted me around for wasn't for my skills at work. It was in bed. He would demand I come into his office first thing in the morning and sleep with him to kickstart his day, and then sometimes in the afternoon, after being stressed with work. I loved dominating in bed, but with my boss, I couldn't even do that. I even faked moaning and orgasms most times just to make him happy. He didn't even last that long, and I always ended up having bruises from where he slammed me against the desk and slept with me from behind. Sometimes, he even turned me into a stripper by asking me to strip slowly, just to get him in the mood. All of these I never told Matt. In fact, I would pass aggression on him most times, especially when he asked about work, and during sex I ensured that I didn't strip completely so he wouldn't notice the bruises. Since I liked being on top of him all the time, it was easy to get away with it. I continued sleeping with my boss and also Kelvin, and it was very exhausting dealing with my boss's crazy sexual demands, especially because he treated me like that was what I was being paid for. I eventually stopped working. Yes, I quit my job and wanted to get another one, but this time without any sexual involvement. But it was hard, because every interview I went for, when they checked my qualifications and saw that I worked for a high-paying company before, they got discouraged from taking me. Some gave the excuse that they didn't pay that high, and some said I must have done something wrong to have quit my job at such a high-paying company. It frustrated me to no end sitting at home doing absolutely nothing. It wasn't what I envisioned myself to be. I wanted to be that boss lady who had a busy career life and still managed to have a man. I eventually got a job, and it was actually the other company's competitor. Yes, I got it by sexual merits again. But you can't blame me totally. I was desperate. But luckily, the boss wasn't around almost all the time, so I only got subjected to being a sex object when he was. So I was cool and decided to manage that. Work was hectic, and I was almost never home on time. I was always having loads of work to finish by the end of the day, and I couldn't leave them undone, so I usually ended up being the last person to leave. Kelvin was such a sweetheart. He would call to ask whether or not I was done, and when I was, he would come pick me up, drive me home from work, and run a bath for me, after which I ate the food he made, and then we would go to bed together. He never asked for sex, especially when he saw how tired I was, and I was usually the one insisting we did have sex because it was a sort of stress relief for me. I almost never knew when Kelvin had jobs to do, which was very often because I was too busy sucked up in my own life to see just how hard he worked. And he never failed to do right by me. We were 2 years into our relationship when Kelvin asked me to marry him. I was so happy, and I agreed instantly. We got married shortly after he proposed to me, and it was the best thing ever. I planned our wedding, and Kelvin had no problem with that. The only thing I put into consideration about Kelvin in the planning was that he didn't like crowds, so I had kept it as minimal as I could. Everything else had been my preference. The cake, the decorations in the hall, the food prepared, and even the suit Kelvin wore for our wedding. I chose the color so it could match with my dress. The wedding was absolutely amazing and beautiful. Aunt Imelda and Matt were there for my wedding, and I had greeted Aunt Imelda, but not Matt. But it was only because he was still sulking that I decided to stop having sex with him. He didn't look like the adorable puppy I once viewed him as, so I just wanted nothing to do with him anymore. After our wedding, we moved into a bigger apartment because we needed the space. Kelvin wanted us to start having kids, but I was against the idea. I couldn't have any kids yet because I didn't want to ruin my perfect working position with my boss, and because I didn't want to go out of shape easily. We even argued about it, and I ended up screaming at Kelvin. although I apologized to him because I knew he didn't know why I was disturbed about it. Eventually, Matt came back into the picture. After my wedding, Matt started texting me and begging for a chance. He'd tell me how much he missed me and how often he just reminisced about our memories together. He even sent me my naked picture once. He told me he never deleted it. When I didn't give him any positive response, he started to threaten to send the picture to my husband, and he would tag it as recent. I was so scared, and I asked him to meet up with me. I didn't want to ruin my perfect marriage because of loose ends like Matt, who didn't know when to stop. I invited him over to my place. Luckily, Kelvin was out of town to deliver some work and wouldn't be back until evening, and I had my off days, and Aunt Imelda was working as usual. Matt came, and we had sex so I could shut his mouth about the picture. I tried convincing him to delete the pictures. Apparently, he had all of them saved, but he refused, saying that was his leverage over me. I didn't have a choice but to continue agreeing to his demands for sex. My plan had been just until I could get the pictures off his phone and permanently delete them. I would have sex with him. But that took forever because Matt's phone wasn't easy to access because of the several locks he had on his phone. I had to eventually drug him to get the pictures. I put a sleeping pill in his drink, and he slept off very fast. Since the drug was only meant to work for 4 hours, I had already employed a hacker who came in immediately after Matt had fallen asleep and helped me hack the phone. He had gotten it, and then deleted it, and every chance of recovering it too. So when Matt woke up, I told him I was no longer interested in our whole arrangement. He threatened to send the pictures to Kelvin, but I called his bluff and left the hotel room. As I walked out with Matt behind me, trying to convince and half threaten me, I bumped into one of Kelvin's friends. They've been close and had been like brothers because they literally grew up together. When I saw him, I was shocked, and I greeted him. He didn't ask what I was doing there when I started to lie that I had come to see my aunt and uncle, who decided to enjoy their anniversary in a hotel, and that my aunt was too tired to see me out, so my uncle was doing so. He just nodded and smiled and then excused himself. I was so angry at Matt, and I asked him never to show his face around me again. I know it was impossible because we were practically family, but I just didn't want to see him at that moment and other times. I was so nervous, and I kept asking Kelvin when he was seeing his friends and if they mentioned anything. Eventually, Kelvin got suspicious, and I had to stop asking the questions because I didn't want him to stop seeing me as anything less than perfect. But then again, no secret can be hidden for long now, can it? Because what I thought I was doing and that Kelvin would never find out, he did. After running into Kelvin's friend, I started being careful so I don't get caught. In fact, I started making excuses so I didn't have to sleep with my boss. I was bothered all around and scared. Matt, after discovering that I had gotten rid of the pictures, started texting and cursing me out and still making empty threats, and I had texted him back that no one would believe him without the evidence, and I blocked his number so he couldn't text me again. I decided to be on safe ground to know whether or not Kelvin's friend told him anything. I had this idea of inviting them over for lunch on a Sunday. When I told Kelvin to host his friends, he had looked at me like I grew another horn, because I had always been the one against any of our friends being in our space. But I told him I just wanted him to be happy and convinced him to invite them over. I was useless in the kitchen, so it was, of course, Kelvin who did all the work. I just helped in setting up the table and went to get some wine and beers since we ran out. When they showed up, including the person I wanted to see exactly, I was pleased. We all ate together, and then they were telling different stories from when they were younger and also their university days. They were telling me how Kelvin avoided being put in the spotlight as much as possible, and how agreeing he was with everyone just to avoid trouble. I was laughing so hard at the stories, and I had decided to input my own say, which had been the worst thing I had done that night. I had tried teasing Kelvin, and I had made the comment about him being feminine because he does all the work around the house, and that I was like his mini-boss. I even went as far as bragging that it was like our roles switched, and I was the husband, and he the wife. But instead of laughing or smiling at my teasing, his friends had kept quiet, and even Kelvin was staring at me in a strange way. He then stood up and walked out of the house. I had been so shocked, and before I could say anything else, his friends also left without a word to me. I was confused and anxious because I didn't think I said such a bad thing at first. But then, after thinking back to my words, especially in front of his friends. I realized just how weak I had painted him to be. I tried calling and texting him, but he refused to respond to any of them. I started panicking the next day when he still refused to show up, and I started calling his friends to ask if they had seen him. That search was limited because I only had 2 of his friends' numbers. I almost reported him missing when he showed up and had given me the most shocking news of my life. And when that phone landed in my lap where I knelt, there had been a video of Matt trying to drag me into the hotel room the day I deleted the pictures off his phone, and my voice was clearly loud. And I was telling him right there that I was done with us, and that he should face Aunt Imelda. I knew instantly that I was finished. His friend must have given him the video. It meant he did see Matt and me way before I noticed him at all. I tried so hard to get Kelvin to listen to me, but he wouldn't hear anything, and he just left the house after picking a few of his things, and he left with some instructions. I must not be at home when he decides to come back again. Guys, what should I do, please? I'm so desperate. I cannot lose Kelvin. I love him, and I know I did horrible things to him, but I'm deeply sorry and regret everything. How do I get him back? Please, guys, help me. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's been exactly 3 months since I made my previous post on this app. It's been exactly 3 months of hell on earth and having to live an unbearable life because everyone hates me. I'm now a divorced, sad, and frustrated woman with no one. Absolutely no one on her side. I feel terrible, and each day just seems to grow to be a worse day. When my family found out that Kelvin was insisting we get divorced just 1 year into our marriage, they had insisted Kelvin tell them what was wrong. Well, let's just say no one in my family wants to see my face anywhere around them for a long time, especially Aunt Imelda. She hates me so much, and she is just disgusted by my presence. She also got rid of cheating Matt by divorcing him and leaving him without a penny. I used to be her favorite niece, and now I'm the one she detests the most. My mom wants to forget the fact that she even had such a disgraceful child come out of her during labor. My dad and my mom have gracefully disowned me, saying it was better to pretend they only have 2 kids than to be ashamed of the last child they did have. I don't blame them. I couldn't even blame them because I brought all of this mess on myself. My life is a disaster everywhere, and the painful thing is, it's happening all at once. The board of directors discovered somehow that I earned my position via sexual merit, and they had dismissed my appointment. To put it plainly, I was fired. All of that does not even hurt as much as the fact that I lost the most amazing man I could ever have because of my stupidity. I lost Kelvin, and it was totally my fault. My stupid pretense to be a perfectionist, who wanted everything her way, has ended because nothing is certainly going my way right now. There is no perfecting anything because everything is damaged beyond repair. I thought what I was doing was all right. I just had to do some dirty deeds to make my life seem perfect on the surface. What I didn't know was that I was ruining my life, and everything happened so fast I had no control. Not one iota of control over the outcome, and now my life is very much the description of hell on earth. Kelvin tolerated my nonsense of being a perfectionist, and even though he saw my very imperfect life, he wanted to still love me and had even married me to prove just how much he really did love me. But I just ended up throwing his love in the gutter and making a mess of it. I took advantage of him, and I cannot begin to say just how badly I regret everything I did to hurt Kelvin. He hates me very much, I'm sure, and so do my parents, and so do you guys too. Everyone hates me. This is the end of my life. Update. Hello, Reddit. This is my last post here. Yes, you don't have to read my sob story anymore because I'll be ending my post here and facing reality full-time now. Although my reality isn't very much, but at the same time quite heavy and unhappy and unbearable. Imagine having to live a life where no one wants you. Everyone treats you like the piece of garbage that you've turned out to be. Even you guys make it difficult to even breathe sometimes with your harsh and insensitive words and insultingly composed jokes. But then I can't exactly blame anyone because I created this mess myself, and there's no way of mopping my way through this one because it is as wide as the sea. Kelvin probably has gotten over me. Well, maybe not gotten over hating me, but must have gotten over loving me. This thought roams through my head each day, and it kills me very slowly inside. I recall each day what I've done to make everything turn out like this, And then I remind myself of things I could have done to avoid the situation I'm in, and I blame myself even more. It's so hard living with yourself when all you wish for is to just detach yourself like everyone else has done and just move on too. But then I cannot. I have to live with myself. My dirty little secret ended up exploding in my face in a not so nice way, and now hell feels like an average word to describe how my life is right now. I regret so much what I did to Kelvin. I should never have done that, and I wish so desperately that I get a second chance to undo what I did, or even be given a time machine to go back in time and never do the stupid things I did. But then again, life doesn't do do-overs now, does it? Or scratch that, the people I hurt want absolutely nothing to do with me, much less give me a chance. I deserve all it is I'm going through right now and even more, and I will probably never stop hurting and regretting losing Kelvin for the rest of my life. Well, thanks for reading through my posts. It has been the only negative feedback that I got because everyone else in my reality is choosing to ignore me. Thanks and goodbye.